First contact in dreams. The first time it happened, Dr. Ilara Chen dismissed it as stress-induced sleep paralysis. Oceanic research stations weren't exactly known for their comfort, especially ones hovering 30 meters above the Mariana Trench. 14 months into her 3-year deep-sea microbiome study, Ilara had grown accustomed to the constant rocking, the perpetual humidity that made everything feel slightly damp, and the isolation that came with being one of only 7 researchers stationed at the Pacific Abyssal Research Center. What she hadn't expected was the hand. It wasn't human. That much was immediately apparent even in the darkness of her small quarters. The fingers were too long, webbed between each digit, with a faint bioluminescent pattern pulsing along what appeared to be scales rather than skin. And yet, despite its alien appearance, the hand held hers with surprising gentleness, as if afraid she might break. Ilara tried to move, to pull away, but her body refused to respond. Classic sleep paralysis, she told herself. The mind wakes before the body. She'd experienced it before during her doctoral studies, those nights spent bent over microscopes until her eyes burned. But this felt different. The weight of the creature beside her was unmistakable, the slight depression in her narrow bunk, where something substantial had settled. The creature's breathing was slow and rhythmic, each exhale releasing a slight chittering sound like water cascading over pebbles. Though her heart raced, Ilara felt no immediate danger, only a profound sense of something impossible occurring. When morning came, she was alone. No evidence remained of her nighttime visitor except for a faint, unfamiliar scent like salt and ozone. Ilara ran her hands over the sheets, finding them dry despite the lingering scent of ocean depths. She told no one. What would she say? That she'd been visited by some sort of mermaid. That would earn her a psych evaluation and possibly a termination of her grant. 3 nights passed without incident, and Ilara had nearly convinced herself it had been nothing more than an exceptionally vivid dream, until it happened again. This time, she fought through the paralysis, forcing her eyes to focus in the dim emergency lighting of her quarters. The being lay beside her, its form only partially visible. Its upper body appeared humanoid, but covered in scales that shifted color subtly, from deep blue to purple as it breathed. Where legs should have been, a muscular tail extended off the edge of the bunk, occasionally twitching as if responding to a dream of its own. But most striking were its eyes, large, liquid orbs that caught what little light existed in the room and reflected it back with intelligence and something Ilara could only interpret as desperation. When those eyes opened and met hers, Ilara felt a sudden pressure inside her head, not painful but insistent, like someone knocking politely but urgently on a door. "Who are you?" she whispered, unsure if speech was even the right approach. The pressure intensified, and suddenly images flooded her mind. Vast underwater cities illuminated by bioengineered light, creatures similar to her visitor swimming in coordinated patterns, and then darkness, explosions, fear. The communication was clumsy but unmistakable. This being was showing her its home, its people, and something terrible that had happened to them. When the connection broke, Ilara gasped as if surfacing from a deep dive. The creature's hand tightened momentarily around hers before relaxing again, its eyes drifting closed as if the effort of communication had exhausted it. By morning, it was gone again, but this time Ilara knew she hadn't imagined it. She checked the station's security logs. Nothing. Environmental sensors. Normal. Whatever this being was, it either didn't register on their instruments or had found a way to bypass them entirely. Over the next 2 weeks, the visitations continued. Each night, the creature appeared, held her hand, and shared more images. Its journey through space in what seemed like a biological vessel, its discovery of Earth's oceans, its fascination with human activities it had observed from the depths. Ilara began leaving her tablet recording, but the footage showed only her sleeping alone, even on nights when she woke to find the visitor beside her. After the 5th visit, Ilara noticed something on her research equipment. The deep-sea acoustic monitors were picking up a pattern, Subtle, barely distinguishable from normal oceanic noise, but definitely there. A repeating sequence of vibrations, too ordered to be natural. Dr. Chen, you've been distracted lately. Dr. Nakamura, the station's director, commented as Ilara pored over the acoustic data during breakfast. Is everything all right? Ilara considered telling him about her visitor, about the communication, but hesitated. Just found some interesting patterns in the deep acoustic monitoring. Probably nothing, but I'd like to investigate further. Those monitors are for tracking whale migrations and seismic activity, not whatever pet project you're developing. Nakamura reminded her, but his tone remained light. Just don't neglect your primary research. That afternoon, Ilara took one of the submersibles down. Not an unusual activity for a marine biologist, but this time she wasn't collecting microbiome samples. She dove deeper than protocol allowed, following the strengthening signal to its source. At 2,000 meters, her submersible's lights illuminated something that shouldn't exist. A structure, clearly artificial, half embedded in the trench wall. Not large, perhaps the size of a small shuttle, but unmistakably crafted with technology beyond human capability. Its surface rippled like liquid metal despite appearing solid, and patterns similar to those on her nighttime visitor's skin pulsed across its hull. Ilara's heart pounded as she maneuvered closer. This was it, physical proof she wasn't hallucinating. But as she approached, warning alarms blared through the submersible. Something was pulling her in, some force field or tractor beam straight out of science fiction. Panic surged through her as the submersible's controls became unresponsive. Just as suddenly as it began, the pull stopped, leaving her hovering mere meters from the strange vessel. The communication pressure she'd felt during the night visits returned, stronger now, accompanied by clear intent. Come closer, it seemed to say, see more. Fighting every scientific safety protocol she'd been trained to follow, Ilara guided the submersible to what appeared to be an airlock or entrance. As she approached, a portion of the hull simply disappeared, revealing an illuminated chamber within. The pressure in her mind intensified with what felt like approval. Inside, the chamber was filled with a breathable liquid, a fact Ilara somehow knew without being told. The submersible's sensors confirmed it contained sufficient oxygen to support human life, though its composition was unlike anything in their database. As she debated her next move, the submersible's communication system activated on its own, displaying a message that chilled her blood. Return to surface immediately. Unusual seismic activity detected. All personnel report to emergency stations. Ilara hesitated, torn between the discovery of a lifetime and her duty to her team. The mental pressure returned, but different now. Urgent, almost fearful. New images filled her mind. Massive vessels, not unlike the one before her but much larger, descending through Earth's atmosphere toward the ocean. With sudden clarity, Ilara understood. Her visitor wasn't just a curious explorer. It was a refugee, perhaps even a sentinel, and whatever it was running from had just arrived. I'll come back, she promised aloud, though she wasn't sure if the being could hear her outside of their nighttime connections. I'll help you. As she pulled away, she caught movement within the vessel, a figure watching her depart, its hand pressed against the transparent barrier, webbed fingers splayed in what could only be interpreted as a farewell. By the time Ilara reached the surface, global news networks were erupting with reports of atmospheric anomalies over major oceans. Military vessels from every maritime nation were converging on entry points where unknown objects had breached Earth's atmosphere and plunged into the seas. First contact wasn't coming. It had already arrived, silently slipping into Earth's oceans while humanity looked to the stars. And somehow, Ilara had become its unwitting ambassador, connected to a being from beyond the stars, through dreams neither of them fully understood. That night, as the research station buzzed with speculation and fear, Ilara waited in her quarters, hand outstretched on her bunk. She needed answers only one being could provide, and this time, she wouldn't wait for sleep to find them. The underwater signal. The chaos that descended upon the Pacific Abyssal Research Center following the global announcement of unknown submersible craft was immediate and transformative. Within 12 hours, the civilian research operation found itself hosting a contingent of military personnel, stern-faced officers from 3 different nations who commandeered equipment and established secure communication channels with their respective governments. Ilara watched them with growing unease, wondering how much they knew. The being that visited her nights, whom she'd begun calling Lumen for the luminescence of its skin, had not appeared since the arrival of the newcomers. She felt its absence like a severed connection, a silence where something meaningful had begun to form. Dr. Chen. A word. Commander Hayes, the American officer who seemed to be coordinating the military presence, beckoned her to the makeshift command center they'd established in the station's conference room. His expression gave away nothing, but the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. Inside, satellite imagery covered digital displays, heat signatures showing massive objects settling into oceanic trenches worldwide. One image highlighted the Mariana Trench with a glowing marker precisely where Ilara had discovered the small vessel. "You were the last person to take a submersible down before the anomalies were detected," Hayes stated, watching her reaction carefully. "Your dive logs show you went deeper than protocol permits." Ilara's throat tightened. "I was tracking an unusual acoustic signature, which you failed to report through proper channels," Hayes interrupted. "Instead, you approached an unknown object and remained in proximity for 17 minutes before returning to the surface." So they knew. Ilara's mind raced. Had the submersible transmitted data automatically? Had they been tracking her movements all along? "Commander, with respect, I'm a scientist. When I discover something unusual, I investigate. I wasn't aware of any protocols regarding potential extraterrestrial objects because, until yesterday, such protocols seemed purely theoretical." Hayes studied her for a moment before nodding to a technician who pulled up footage from Ilara's own submersible cameras. The quality was poor, distorted by the depths and whatever energy field surrounded the alien vessel, but unmistakably showed her approach and the opening of what appeared to be an entrance. "Dr. Chen, we believe you may have made first contact with an advanced scout of whatever force has now arrived in greater numbers. What we need to know is whether you established any form of communication with the entity." Ilara hesitated. Revealing her dream connections would sound delusional at best, grounds for immediate removal from the station at worst. Yet withholding information now could hinder humanity's response to whatever was happening. "The vessel appeared dormant," she said carefully. "I detected biosignatures inside but observed no direct communication attempts. My primary focus was documenting the discovery. It wasn't entirely a lie. The communication had happened elsewhere, in a space between waking and dreaming that seemed to exist outside physical reality." Hayes looked disappointed but not surprised. "Very well. We're establishing a deep-sea monitoring network around the discovered vessel. Your expertise will be valuable in this operation, but you'll report directly to my team now." As the day progressed, Ilara found herself both central to the operation and increasingly isolated from its true purpose. She helped position sensors and interpret data, but the military officers shared little about their findings or intentions. Through snippets of conversation and glimpses of secured communications, she gathered that similar scenarios were playing out at research stations worldwide. That night, exhausted but restless, Ilara lay in her bunk waiting. The station hummed with activity even at this hour. Additional personnel meant round-the-clock operations, making her nightly visitations seem increasingly impossible. How would Lumen reach her with so many watchful eyes? She must have drifted off eventually, because she woke suddenly to the familiar pressure in her mind. Not beside her this time, but insistent, urgent. Her quarters remained empty, but the mental connection was stronger than ever. Images flooded her consciousness. The larger vessels disgorging smaller craft, structures being assembled on the ocean floor, preparations that looked disturbingly military in nature. Then came something new, a sensation rather than an image, a question that formed in her mind with surprising clarity. Why do your kind fear us? They don't understand what you are, or what you want. Ilara whispered into the darkness, hoping the mental connection worked both ways. Are you in danger? The vessel I found. Is that you? The response came as a confusing tangle of impressions. Confirmation, denial, complexity beyond simple answers. She understood that Lumen was connected to the vessel, but was not physically inside it at this moment. The vessel served as some kind of anchor or beacon, allowing communication across vast distances, including the distance between waking and dreaming states. Others come, not like me. Seek conquest, not connection. The message hit Ilara with chilling clarity. An invasion. The larger vessels. They're hostile. Fleeing. Pursued. Found sanctuary. Now sanctuary threatened. Ilara struggled to interpret the fragmented communication. You came here seeking refuge, and now your pursuers have followed. Affirmation flooded her mind, along with deep regret and fear. How many like you are there? Refugees seeking peace. Few. Scattered. Hiding. And the others, the hostile ones. Many. United. Determined. A new image formed. Earth's oceans transformed, altered at a molecular level to become hospitable to the invaders while toxic to terrestrial life. The process had already begun, subtle chemical changes introduced through devices planted at strategic locations across the ocean floor. Horror washed over Ilara as she understood. This wasn't just an invasion. It was terraforming in reverse, a systematic conversion of Earth's hydrosphere to support alien biology, while eradicating native species, including humans. I need to warn them, Ilara began, reaching for her tablet. Cannot stop alone. Need connection. Need trust. Trust. How can I ask people to trust what they can't even see? You need to show yourself, prove you're different from those who've come to harm us. Reluctance, fear, and finally resignation flowed through the connection. Then, a new image. Coordinates, a time, a place where Lumen would appear to those Ilara brought. The risk was enormous for both of them. When the connection faded, Ilara found herself drenched in sweat, her tablet clutched in her hand. She had less than 6 hours to convince military commanders that they needed to meet with an alien being who visited her in dreams, and that this being represented humanity's only hope against an invasion already in progress. She began typing her report, knowing how it would sound, knowing the likely response. But the alternative was silence, and silence now meant complicity in humanity's potential extinction. By dawn, Ilara stood before Commander Hayes and representatives from 3 governments, her scientific credibility hanging by a thread as she described her communications with Lumen. The skepticism in the room was palpable, thinly veiled behind professional courtesy. You expect us to commit resources based on dreams. One officer scoffed. I expect you to consider all data, especially when conventional approaches yield nothing, Ilara countered. The chemical changes I've detected in water samples match exactly what I was shown would happen. Something is altering our oceans at the molecular level, and our instruments barely detect it. Hayes studied the readings Ilara had provided. These changes are subtle but consistent with reports from other stations. Still, the leap from unusual chemical signatures to alien telepathic communication is substantial. I've provided coordinates where we can meet one of them, a refugee opposing the invasion. If I'm wrong, you've wasted one submersible excursion. If I'm right, you gain intelligence no sensor network could provide. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably until Hayes finally nodded. We'll investigate these coordinates. You'll accompany us, Dr. Chen, and if this proves to be mistaken or, worse, a deliberate misdirection, the consequences will be severe. 4 hours later, Ilara descended in a military-grade submersible alongside Hayes and 2 specialists. The craft's enhanced propulsion systems brought them quickly to the designated coordinates, a natural rock formation creating a partial cave at the edge of the trench. As they waited in tense silence, Hayes checked his watch. "Your alien friend appears to be running late." Ilara said nothing, eyes fixed on the viewports. Then, slowly, the water before them began to shimmer, subtle at first, then with increasing intensity as bioluminescent patterns formed a recognizable shape. Lumen materialized from what seemed like the water itself, its form more substantial than in Ilara's dreams, yet still possessing an otherworldly fluidity. The being approached cautiously, webbed hands extended in what Ilara recognized as a gesture of peace. Inside the submersible, instruments fluctuated wildly. "Some kind of electromagnetic field," one specialist muttered, fingers flying over controls. "It's disrupting our systems. No harm intended. Necessary for communication." The thought projected into all their minds simultaneously, causing Hayes to jerk back in surprise. "It's communicating telepathically," Ilara explained, feeling a surge of validation. "This is how it's been reaching me through dreams." Hayes recovered quickly, his training overriding his shock. "Ask why its kind has invaded Earth's oceans." "Not my kind. My pursuers. I am refugee. Political dissident. Escaped genocide." The communication was stronger now, more coherent with multiple minds to connect with. They remake worlds to serve their empire. Earth next target. Images flooded their collective consciousness, a vast interstellar civilization that had perfected the art of aquatic world conversion, seeking always to expand, to consume, to conquer. Lumen's people had resisted, had fought for autonomy, and had been systematically eliminated for their rebellion. How many refugees reached Earth? Hayes asked directly, adapting quickly to the mental communication. 17 survivors, scattered global oceans, hiding, watching, warning when possible. And the invaders. Thousands now, more coming. Conversion process begun. 62 Earth days until irreversible. Hayes looked to Ilara, his expression grim. "If this is true, we're already under attack in a war we didn't know we were fighting." Lumen drifted closer to the viewport, placing one webbed hand against the transparent barrier. "Help possible. Together. My knowledge. Your technology. Bond needed." "Bond?" Ilara questioned. "What kind of bond?" The answer came not in words but in sensation, a deeper connection than the current communication, a sharing of minds that would allow direct access to knowledge, to memories, to the technical understanding needed to combat the invasion. Hayes shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. That level of alien influence is exactly what we need," Ilara interrupted. "Commander, we're facing an enemy with technology centuries beyond ours, already deployed in our oceans. Conventional weapons will be useless against them. Choose quickly. Invaders sense our communication. Will seek source." As if confirming Lumen's warning, the submersible's proximity alarms activated. Something large was approaching from the depths of the trench, moving with unnatural speed. Hayes barked orders to prepare for emergency ascent, but Ilara knew they wouldn't make it, not if the approaching craft possessed even a fraction of the technology Lumen had shown them. "Wait," she said, turning to Lumen. "I volunteer for the bond. Show us how to fight them." The being's eyes, those large liquid orbs that had first appeared in her dreams, seemed to smile with something like hope. As the enemy craft came into view, a monstrous vehicle that pulsed with hostile energy, Lumen pressed both hands against the viewport. "Begin now." Bridge formed. Knowledge transfers. Humanity's ingenuity plus my understanding. Hope exists. The submersible's emergency lights activated as systems began failing under some external influence. Hayes shouted for evasive maneuvers while the specialists frantically worked to restore power. Ilara barely heard them. Her consciousness expanded as Lumen's knowledge flowed into her mind, not just information but understanding, connections between concepts that humankind had yet to discover. The oceanic chemistry of Lumen's world, the electromagnetic principles that allowed their technology to manipulate water itself as both weapon and shield. As the hostile craft fired its first energy pulse, Ilara knew what had to be done. Earth's last hope lay in the ocean itself, if only she could make them understand in time. Invasion from the deep. The military submersible shot toward the surface in a desperate escape maneuver, its hull groaning under pressures it wasn't designed to withstand. The pursuing alien craft fired again, the energy pulse dissipating in the water just meters behind them. Inside, alarms blared as backup systems struggled to maintain life support. Hayes gripped the command console, barking orders while the specialists worked frantically to restore defensive capabilities. Ilara sat unnaturally still, her eyes half closed, consciousness split between the chaos of the submersible and the vast new landscape of knowledge unfolding within her mind. Through the viewport, she caught a final glimpse of Lumen before the beam dissolved into the water, not retreating but transforming, becoming one with the ocean in a way human physiology could never achieve. "They're charging weapons again," a specialist called out. "Impact in 5 seconds. Brace 4. Hayes began, but Ilara cut him off. "No, wait." Her voice had changed, carrying harmonics that raised the hairs on everyone's necks. She pressed her hands against the submersible wall, and outside, the water around them suddenly churned, forming a spiraling current that enveloped their craft like a cocoon. The enemy weapon fired, but the energy dispersed harmlessly through the swirling water barrier. The pursuing craft hesitated, sensors likely confused by the unexplained phenomenon. "What the hell is happening?" Hayes demanded, staring at Ilara. "The bond," she replied, her attention clearly divided. "Lumen's knowledge, my mind. I understand how they manipulate water now. It's about molecular resonance, creating harmonic patterns that the ocean itself responds to." Hayes looked skeptical but couldn't argue with results. "Can you maintain this protection until we reach the surface?" Ilara nodded, though sweat beaded on her forehead from the mental exertion. "Get us to the station. I need equipment, resources. This is just the beginning." When they finally breached the surface, the military presence at the research station had doubled. News of the underwater encounter had elevated the global threat assessment, and now the floating facility served as an impromptu command center for what military leaders were reluctantly beginning to call the Oceanic Defense Initiative. Ilara was immediately whisked to medical for evaluation. Doctors found nothing physically wrong, but noted unusual brain activity, patterns that cycled in ways human neurology typically didn't. "Support. It's the bond," she explained to Hayes and a gathering of military and scientific leadership. "Lumen's consciousness isn't controlling me, but our minds are linked, sharing information. Their species evolved to communicate this way. It's as natural to them as speech is to us." "And what exactly has this bond told you about our situation?" asked Dr. Nakamura, now relegated to an advisory role in his own research station. Ilara activated the holographic display in the conference room, her fingers moving with newfound precision. "The invasion force consists of 3 waves. First, the advanced scouts who placed chemical converters at strategic locations throughout Earth's oceans." She displayed a global map with pulsing red dots at deep ocean locations. "These devices are already releasing compounds that begin breaking down our ocean's natural chemistry, preparing it for transformation." "Can't we simply destroy these devices?" a naval admiral asked. "Not without triggering fail-safe mechanisms that would accelerate the process," Ilara explained. "The second wave has already arrived. Warrior-class submersibles like the one that attacked us, patrolling to protect the converters and eliminate resistance. The third wave, arriving within 2 weeks, carries their colonists and terraforming equipment." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Earth faced an invasion unlike anything humanity had prepared for, not from the skies, but from the depths. "What about nuclear options?" someone suggested quietly. Hayes shook his head. "Underwater detonations would create catastrophic damage to our own ecosystems without any guarantee of stopping their technology." "There's another way," Ilara said. "Lumen's people developed countermeasures during the resistance, technological approaches that work with Earth's natural ocean systems rather than against them. She pulled up schematics for devices unlike anything human engineering had conceived, systems that generated specific frequency patterns, creating interference fields that disrupted the invader's molecular manipulation capabilities. We need to build these devices and deploy them at key oceanic junctions. They'll not only neutralize the chemical converters, but create safe zones where the invader's technology functions poorly, giving our conventional forces a fighting chance. You expect us to replicate alien technology we don't understand based on schematics received through some psychic link? A skeptical general challenged. Ilara met his gaze steadily. No, I expect to build it myself, with help from scientists willing to work with concepts beyond current human understanding. The physics isn't actually alien. It's just applications we haven't discovered yet. What followed was a 72-hour engineering marathon. Ilara worked without rest, her enhanced understanding guiding teams of engineers and scientists through the construction of prototypes. Existing research equipment was repurposed, manufacturing capacities stretched to their limits as components took shape. Throughout the process, Ilara experienced moments of disorientation as Lumen communicated updates from around the world. Other refugees had made contact with humans near their hiding places, forming similar bonds with selected individuals. A global resistance network was emerging, coordinated through the shared consciousness of the bonded pairs. On the fourth day, as the first functional disruptor device was being loaded onto a deployment vessel, alarms sounded throughout the station. 3 invader craft had been detected approaching from different directions. "They've located us," Hayes announced grimly. "Evacuate all non-essential personnel." "No," Ilara countered, her expression resolute. "We deploy now. This is the test." Despite objections, the prototype was rapidly transferred to a submersible piloted by a volunteer team, including Ilara. As they descended, she felt Lumen's presence strengthen in her mind, guiding her. "Position device at coordinates exactly. Ocean currents will amplify effect." The invader craft converged as they approached the designated location, a natural underwater canyon where currents from multiple directions intersected. The alien vessels moved with predatory grace, their hulls rippling with weapons preparing to fire. "Device activation in 30 seconds, the technician announced, voice tight with tension. The lead alien craft fired first, a pulse of energy that the submersible barely evaded. The second shot clipped their stern, sending them spinning through the water. "Hull breach in Section 3, the pilot shouted. "Losing power. 10 seconds to activation." The technician continued, fingers flying over controls. Ilara closed her eyes, reaching through the bond. "Lumen, we need help." The response came immediately, not just from Lumen, but from 3 other refugees who had converged on this location, sensing the confrontation. The water around the submersible began to pulse, with bioluminescence as the beings manipulated currents to stabilize their descent. "Device active," the technician announced as the countdown reached 0. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, rippling outward from the device, waves of energy invisible to human eyes, but brilliantly apparent through Ilara's bonded senses, spread through the water. Where these waves touched the invader craft, their hulls began to lose cohesion, the molecular manipulation that maintained their structure disrupted by precisely calibrated counter-frequencies. The effect wasn't explosive or violent. Instead, the alien vessels simply began to fall apart, unable to maintain integrity as the disruptor field interfered with their fundamental operating principles. Systems failed, weapons powered down, and finally, the crafts themselves began to dissolve back into base components. Through the bond, Ilara felt the invaders' confusion and fear as their supposedly invincible technology failed them. There was no loss of life. The pilots ejected in escape pods that shot toward the surface, where human forces waited to intercept them. "It works," she breathed, watching the disintegration through the viewport. "The disruption field works exactly as Lumen showed us." Despite the damaged submersible, they managed to return to the station, where their success was met with stunned silence followed by cautious celebration. But Ilara knew this was just the beginning. "We need to mass-produce these devices immediately," she told the assembled leadership. "The field effect has a limited range, and we need coverage at every major oceanic junction before the third wave arrives." What followed was perhaps the most remarkable mobilization in human history. As news of the successful prototypes spread through classified channels, governments worldwide diverted manufacturing capabilities toward producing components. Research stations became production facilities, naval vessels became deployment platforms, and the International Space Observation Network was repurposed to track the approaching third wave. Through it all, the network of bonded human-alien pairs expanded, each connection strengthening the overall coordination. 17 refugees, 17 human partners, all working in concert with thousands of unbonded humans who took their guidance on faith and determination. 2 weeks later, as the massive colony ships of the third wave descended through Earth's atmosphere, they encountered not the welcoming, partially converted oceans they expected, but a planet prepared for their arrival. Disruption fields activated simultaneously across all major oceans, creating a planetary defense grid that rendered their technology largely inoperable. From her position at the main control center, Ilara watched the incoming data with Lumen's understanding overlaid on her own. The invasion force, finding their advantage neutralized, attempted to retreat, only to discover that Earth's combined military forces, guided by knowledge of alien weaknesses, had prepared countermeasures against even this contingency. "They're initiating communication," Hayes announced, now a general coordinating the global response. "Seems they want to talk." Ilara nodded, unsurprised. Their species values pragmatism above all. With their technological advantage neutralized, they'll seek terms rather than risk annihilation. Terms. Hayes looked skeptical. "They tried to terraform our planet out from under us. And now they understand it's protected," Ilara replied. "This is humanity's moment. How we respond defines us in the cosmic community we've just joined." The negotiations that followed would reshape human understanding of interstellar politics. The invaders, facing united resistance not just from humans, but from their own former victims now allied with Earth, agreed to withdraw and recognize Earth's sovereignty. More importantly, the technology developed through the Human Refugee Partnership proved adaptable to purposes beyond defense. The same principles that disrupted harmful molecular manipulation could be applied to ocean restoration, climate stabilization, and eventually, cleaner energy production. As the immediate crisis passed, Ilara found herself standing at the observation deck of the research station, watching the sunrise over an ocean that still belonged to Earth. Beside her, Lumen had manifested in physical form, the beam's bioluminescent patterns pulsing softly in the growing light. "What happens now?" Ilara asked, both aloud and through their connection. "Will your people stay? Some will return home, now that invaders weakened. Others wish to remain. Learn, teach, grow together, and you." Lumen's response came with gentle amusement. "Bond remains, work just beginning. Oceans still need protection. Universe still dangerous." Ilara smiled, understanding the truth of it. The invasion had been repelled, but humanity had taken its first steps onto a larger stage, one filled with both dangers and wonders beyond imagination. The bond between their species had saved Earth, but it had also created something entirely new, a partnership that transcended biological differences to create solutions neither could have developed alone. "Then we continue together," she said, watching the light spread across the water's surface. "There's so much more to learn." "Yes," Lumen agreed, the being's hand finding hers in a gesture that had begun in dreams and now continued in waking reality. "The best discoveries always come from reaching across differences, from finding connection where none seemed possible." As research vessels and military craft moved across the horizon, Ilara felt hope expanding within her. Humanity had faced its first extraterrestrial challenge not with fear alone, but with adaptation, cooperation, and ingenuity. They had not just survived, they had evolved, proving worthy of the stars they had so long gazed upon. The bond between worlds had only just begun. Humanity's ingenuity. 1 year after the failed invasion, the Pacific Abyssal Research Center barely resembled its former self. What had once been a modest scientific outpost now served as the primary hub for the United Earth Oceanic Defense and Research Initiative, a sprawling complex of interconnected platforms hovering above the Mariana Trench, housing over 300 personnel from 47 nations. Ilara, now Director of Xenobiological Relations, guided a delegation of United Nations representatives through the recently completed integration chamber, a massive spherical room where the environment could shift between air and oxygenated liquid at varying pressures, allowing humans and aquatic beings to converse in person without barriers. The technological advances stemming from the Refugee Alliance have accelerated our understanding of molecular manipulation by approximately 7 times. Claude hit the max length for a message and has paused its response. You can write continue to keep the chat going. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.